She greeted me with a smile that seemed to take up the entire room, warm, confident, yet carrying a subtle grace that immediately made me aware of her presence in a way that was different from anyone else. She was in her early 40s, her hair a soft cascade of brown with hints of gold under the dim porch light, and her posture radiated elegance without trying too hard. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, a rhythm that was effortless, almost magnetic. As we exchanged pleasantries, I felt a strange tension, one that was almost imperceptible at first. Her eyes lingered on me just a beat longer than expected, and when she laughed at something my friend said, her voice, soft, melodic, brushed against my consciousness in a way that made me unusually aware of my own heartbeat. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine, maybe a hint of sandalwood, subtle, familiar, yet intoxicating in its own quiet way. I tried to focus on the conversation, on my friend's words and the casual jokes about work and college, but it was difficult not to notice her. She moved around the room with ease, carrying a tray of snacks, her fingers brushing lightly against the edges of the plates, the soft rustle of her clothes filling the quiet spaces. When she passed near me, the brief brush of her arm against mine sent a small, electric shiver through me. It was fleeting, innocent, yet it left a trace, like a shadow that lingers even after the sun has moved on. She asked me questions, light, thoughtful, showing genuine interest, and I found myself caught between the urge to answer casually and the growing awareness that I wanted to impress her, to make her smile just for me. There was something in her gaze, something quietly piercing, that seemed to measure me, not critically, but with an interest that made my chest tighten in ways I hadn't expected. Throughout the evening, I kept reminding myself, she was my friend's aunt. This wasn't meant to be anything beyond a polite acquaintance. Yet, the subtle glances, the soft smiles, and the warmth of her presence planted a seed of curiosity and tension that I couldn't ignore. Even as I left that night, walking back through the garden path with the jasmine scent lingering in the air, I knew this meeting was different. Something unspoken had begun, delicate and dangerous in its quiet intensity, a connection that neither of us had acknowledged aloud, yet both had already felt. It was a meeting that would linger in memory, setting the stage for a slow, cautious exploration of something that neither of us could quite name, but both secretly wondered about. Over the next few weeks, what began as casual visits to my friend's house slowly transformed into something far more layered. I found myself noticing her in ways that felt entirely new, the subtle elegance in the way she moved, the small gestures she made that seemed to carry meaning only I could perceive. She had a way of noticing the little things. My favorite drink left on the counter, the way I held my book while reading, the hesitation in my words when I was unsure. It started with brief, almost accidental touches. When she handed me a plate of food, her fingers grazed mine for just a fraction of a second. Nothing overt, but enough to make a warmth creep along my arm that lingered long after she had moved away. I noticed the way she would lean slightly closer when we talked, her shoulder brushing against mine as she explained a recipe or recounted a story from her youth. These were innocent touches, socially acceptable, yet charged with a quiet electricity that neither of us acknowledged aloud. Her laughter became something I unconsciously sought out. It wasn't loud or performative. It was the kind of laughter that filled a room softly, making everything feel warmer, more intimate. There was a rhythm to her speech, a cadence that drew me in. I caught myself replaying our conversations later, remembering the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the subtle tilt of her head when she listened intently, and the gentle way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. One afternoon, she invited me into the kitchen under the pretense of helping her prepare tea. As I leaned over the counter to pour water into the kettle, our arms brushed. A fleeting touch, yet it lingered in memory. She didn't pull away quickly. Instead, she gave a small, knowing smile, as if aware of the effect her presence had on me. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, an odd mixture of embarrassment and exhilaration. Despite the growing tension, our interactions were comfortable, almost effortless. We talked about books, movies, music, topics that revealed glimpses of who we were, without the pressure of romantic expectation. There was a gentle intimacy in these exchanges, a quiet understanding that words alone could not capture. She listened with a sincerity that made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way I rarely experienced. By the time I left those visits, I was always acutely aware of her absence. The subtle traces she left, a lingering glance, the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth of her presence, stayed with me long after I stepped outside. I knew, even then, that something unspoken had begun to grow between us. It wasn't a declaration, nor a temptation overtly expressed, but a delicate thread of connection, fragile, electric, and undeniably compelling. These small moments, these almost imperceptible interactions, were the quiet foundation of something far greater. They were the first sparks of a bond that neither of us could ignore, setting the stage for the emotional journey that was just beginning. One filled with longing, hesitation, and a curiosity neither of us fully understood. It was one of those evenings that felt suspended in time, the kind where the world outside seems to soften and fade. My friend had gone out to run an errand, leaving me alone with his aunt in the quiet living room. She suggested we sit for a cup of tea, and I accepted, though my mind was already racing with thoughts I didn't fully understand. The kitchen smelled faintly of cardamom and freshly baked bread as she poured the steaming tea into delicate porcelain cups. The warmth of the cup seeped into my hands, but it was nothing compared to the warmth I felt from her presence nearby. We sat side by side on the sofa, the soft glow of the table lamp casting gentle shadows across her face. Her eyes, thoughtful and steady, met mine with an intensity that made me acutely aware of every beat of my own heart. She spoke first, softly, almost hesitantly, about her life, her hopes, regrets, and quiet moments of loneliness. There was no drama in her words, only an honest vulnerability that made the space between us feel intimate, almost sacred. I listened, drawn not only to the stories she told but to the rhythm of her voice, the way her hand rested near mine on the arm of the sofa, just close enough to make me conscious of its nearness without overstepping any boundary. At one point, our hands brushed lightly as she reached for her cup. The contact was fleeting, but the heat of it lingered, settling deep into my chest. Her fingers recoiled just slightly, and then she gave a small, knowing smile, as if she understood the effect the simplest touch could have. I swallowed, trying to focus on her words, but my awareness of her, the gentle slope of her shoulder, the soft curve of her neck, the quiet steadiness of her breathing, pulled me into a current I didn't fully understand but couldn't resist. She laughed quietly at something I said, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to vibrate in the space between us. And then, almost unconsciously, she leaned just a little closer, her head tilting toward mine, as if seeking connection beyond words. The closeness was dizzying in its simplicity, charged not by overt desire but by an unspoken understanding. It was a confession of presence, of interest, of curiosity that neither of us dared name aloud. For a moment the world shrank to the space we shared. I could hear the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat as she shifted slightly, and I felt the tug of something I couldn't yet define, a magnetic pull that balanced delicately between familiarity and forbidden longing. By the time I left that evening, my mind was a storm of emotion. I knew something was growing between us, something that existed in stolen glances, brushed hands, and quiet confessions. She had shared pieces of herself, and in doing so, had opened a door I didn't even know I was waiting for. The seed of desire, subtle yet undeniable, had been planted, and I sensed that neither of us would be able to ignore its quiet insistence for long. It was the first step toward something we both feared to name, a delicate prelude to the emotional journey that was only just beginning. And as I walked away that night, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in my senses, I realized that our connection had deepened, silently, irrevocably, and entirely too quickly to remain innocent for much longer. The rain had started unexpectedly, soft at first, then gathering into a steady rhythm against the windows. I was helping her carry groceries inside from the car, the chill in the air making our shared task feel oddly intimate. She laughed lightly, shaking her umbrella to clear the droplets, and I realized how her presence had a way of grounding me even in the simplest of moments. As we paused at the doorway, water dripping from the edges of her coat, our hands brushed while holding the bag of groceries. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but the warmth of her skin against mine lingered far longer than it should have. I could feel the subtle tremor in my fingers, a mixture of surprise and something far deeper that I was just beginning to acknowledge. She looked up at me, her eyes catching the dim light of the hallway, and there was a quiet question there, unspoken yet entirely clear. I noticed the small details, the way her wet hair clung to her neck, the soft rustle of her coat as she shifted her weight, the faint scent of rain mixed with her perfume. It was sensory overload in the most subtle way, a combination of comfort and tension that made my chest tighten. She smiled, not in a teasing way, but softly, with an elegance that made the moment feel suspended in time. As we set the groceries down inside, our shoulders brushed again. This time it was deliberate, gentle, a contact that seemed to test the boundaries of propriety without crossing them. I felt the quiet pull of something forbidden, yet entirely compelling. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the small distance that remained between us, but I hesitated. The weight of social expectation and the knowledge that she was my friend's aunt held me back. Yet even in that hesitation, there was an intimacy that could not be denied. She leaned slightly toward me, just enough that our sides touched, the warmth radiating from her body mingling with the damp chill clinging to my jacket. Our eyes met for a heartbeat, and in that fleeting glance, the world outside, the rain, the groceries, even the ordinary hallway, fell away. It was just us, connected in a moment that neither of us needed to define yet understood perfectly. When she finally stepped away to hang her coat, I realized how much that moment had lingered in my mind even as I tried to focus on the mundane tasks of putting the groceries away. Her presence had a way of making ordinary acts feel charged with emotion, of making the everyday seem extraordinary simply because we were sharing it. Later, as I left her house, the sound of the rain still tapping against the windows echoed in my ears. I could feel the residual warmth from our accidental touches, the lingering echo of her gaze, and the quiet tension that had settled between us like an unspoken promise. That evening, I understood for the first time that the connection between us was no longer casual. Something unspoken had begun to take root. A subtle, quiet desire that would continue to grow in stolen touches, lingering glances, and the shared silence of moments like this one. And I knew, with a strange mixture of exhilaration and trepidation, that neither of us would forget this rainy evening for a long time. That it was a quiet evening when I found myself at her home again, this time under the pretense of watching a movie together. The living room was softly lit, the warm glow of a single lamp casting gentle shadows across the furniture. Outside, the faint hum of the city was a distant murmur, leaving the space between us feeling almost suspended, intimate in a way that made my chest tighten. We settled on the sofa side by side. The fabric of the cushions was soft beneath us, but it was the subtle closeness of her that drew my attention. The way her shoulder almost touched mine, the faint warmth radiating from her as she adjusted to sit more comfortably. Every slight movement seemed magnified in my awareness. When our knees brushed lightly, a small shiver ran up my spine, unnoticed by anyone but me, yet it anchored me to the moment, to her presence. Her laughter came quietly at something on the screen, and I noticed the delicate way her fingers tapped against the edge of the sofa, almost brushing mine. Our eyes met for a brief instant, and there was something in that look. A spark, a hesitation, an acknowledgement of the tension simmering quietly between us. Neither of us spoke it aloud, yet the silence was heavy with unspoken words. I could feel the pull of desire, subtle and restrained, a magnetic force neither of us dared fully admit. I watched her in these moments, captivated not just by her beauty, but by the depth in her expressions. The slight furrow of her brow when concentrating, the soft curve of her lips when smiling, the gentle tilt of her head when she laughed. These small, intimate details drew me closer in thought, if not yet in action. The closeness was electric, charged with emotion and longing, yet perfectly balanced by respect and caution. At one point, she reached for the blanket draped over the back of the sofa, and our hands brushed as she pulled it toward us. The contact was fleeting, yet it lingered like a soft echo in my mind. Her gaze met mine, steady, knowing, almost daring me to acknowledge the tension that hovered in the space between us. My pulse quickened, But I remained still, aware that this delicate dance, this unspoken desire, was as much about restraint as it was about connection. There was a beauty in this restraint, in the way our emotions and physical awareness intertwined without needing to be named. It was in the shared laughter, the quiet smiles, the soft brushing of hands and shoulders. Every fleeting touch, every lingering look, built a tapestry of longing and affection that words could never capture. When the movie ended, we didn't rush to part ways. We lingered on the sofa, sharing quiet smiles, hands resting near each other without fully touching, savoring the closeness that had become almost unbearable in its subtlety. In that silence, I realized how much we had already crossed, emotionally if not physically, and how each moment of restrained longing made the connection between us feel even deeper, more profound. By the time I left her home that night, I carried the memory of her warmth, her presence, and the electric, unspoken desire that had silently defined the evening. It was a desire we both knew existed but neither dared to voice, a tension that promised more closeness, more vulnerability, more intimacy. When the right moment came, it was one of those nights where the air itself seemed heavy with anticipation, the kind of evening that carries the world in soft shadows and muted sounds. We had gone for a walk in a quiet park nearby, the streets empty except for the distant hum of passing cars. The night smelled faintly of wet earth and jasmine from nearby gardens, a scent that somehow seemed to wrap around us, intimate and private. We walked side by side, the silence between us comfortable yet taut, each step synchronized in a way that made the space between us feel smaller. At some point, we stopped under the soft glow of a lamppost, its light spilling over us in golden warmth. Rain from earlier had left the pavement glistening, reflecting the faint shimmer of the lamp, and for a moment, it felt like the rest of the world had melted away. Her hand brushed against mine as she adjusted her scarf, and for a heartbeat, our fingers lingered in contact. It was deliberate this time, slow, exploratory without being overt, a touch that said everything words could not. I felt a rush of warmth, a quiet thrill that left my heart beating faster, my thoughts tangled with both excitement and fear. She looked at me then, her eyes glistening in the lamplight, steady and unafraid, carrying a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I shouldn't," she started, her voice soft, almost hesitant. She paused, glancing away toward the shadowed path ahead, then back at me, her gaze steady and open. "I shouldn't feel this, but I can't stop thinking about you." Her words hung in the air, fragile yet undeniable. I could feel the gravity of the moment pressing gently against my chest, an invisible weight that was both thrilling and terrifying. I swallowed, my voice catching slightly as I responded, "I feel it too, more than I should. I've tried to ignore it, but I can't." We stood there, close enough that our shoulders touched, the warmth of our bodies mingling in the cool night air. The confession was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, sincere, and entirely human. There was no rush, no urgency. Only a deep acknowledgement of what had been growing between us for weeks, nurtured in small touches, lingering glances, and shared silences. Her hand found mine again, this time fully entwining our fingers. The simple connection was grounding, comforting, and electric all at once. I could feel the steadiness of her heartbeat beneath my palm, a rhythmic affirmation of what we both felt. The vulnerability in her eyes mirrored my own, a reflection of shared longing and the courage it took to speak it aloud. We didn't need to speak more. The silence that followed was filled with understanding, trust, and the subtle thrill of what was finally admitted. There was no drama, only the quiet power of honesty, the recognition that we had crossed a boundary, not recklessly, but with care and mutual respect. As we continued our walk, fingers still entwined, the night felt lighter, charged with promise rather than uncertainty. The confession had not solved everything, nor had it removed the complexity of our situation, but it had given us something far more valuable: clarity, emotional intimacy, and the undeniable start of something secret, yet profoundly real. A few days had passed since our confession, and everything felt subtly changed. The air between us was charged, yet calm, a delicate balance of intimacy, awareness, and mutual respect. We met again at a neutral, comfortable space. Her home, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight streaming through the curtains. The mundane familiarity of the room made our connection feel safe, a place where our emotions could exist without the weight of judgment or expectation. We settled on the sofa, side by side as usual, though this time there was no hesitation, no restraint in the shared presence. Our hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining with a quiet ease that felt like returning home. It was a touch that spoke volumes. Comfort, acknowledgement, and a gentle claim of closeness without the need for words. She laughed softly at something I said, the sound low and melodic, and I noticed how easily my chest relaxed in response. Her hand brushed mine again, lingering a little longer this time, and I felt the steady warmth of her palm grounding me. Each subtle touch, each glance, was an unspoken conversation, a reinforcement of the emotional intimacy we had cultivated through weeks of careful, quiet moments. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, the jasmine notes wrapping around me like a gentle embrace. Her presence was calming yet electrifying, a paradox that made even the simplest acts, sipping tea, adjusting a cushion, laughing at an old memory, feel charged with shared significance. I could sense her awareness of me, just as I was acutely aware of her, in ways that transcended casual friendship yet stayed perfectly respectful of the world outside these walls. We talked, softly, honestly, without any pretense, about our days, our thoughts, and our shared moments of quiet connection. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by pauses where our fingers remained intertwined, our shoulders occasionally brushing, and our eyes meeting in steady acknowledgement. Each small gesture, the tilt of her head, the gentle squeeze of her hand, reinforced the bond that had grown between us, subtle yet unbreakable. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. The intimacy we shared was in the quietness, in the patience, in the unspoken understanding of one another. The age difference, once a silent question in my mind, felt irrelevant here. It was replaced by mutual respect, emotional depth, and a shared desire for closeness. By the time the evening faded into night, there was a profound sense of resolution. We sat together, still holding hands, the warmth between us enough to fill the space with contentment. The tension of weeks past had settled into a quiet satisfaction, a secure foundation for whatever the future might hold. We had crossed boundaries, yes, but we had done so with care, honesty, and mutual regard. As I finally stood to leave, she pressed my hand gently, a small smile lighting her features. No words were necessary. The moment said it all. Something private, precious, and real had begun between us. A connection that was intimate yet respectful, passionate yet restrained, secret yet fully acknowledged in our hearts. Walking away that night, I felt the lingering warmth of her hand, the quiet echo of her laughter, and the undeniable certainty that what we shared had grown into something profoundly, irrevocably ours.